Hello and welcome to the Ag Culture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, I'm recording here on my last morning in Dublin, Ireland, the very last day of my 6 weeks of traveling around the world with a group of 11 great people from 7 different countries in our global focus program through the Nuffield Scholars program. And I just wanted to do a wrap up review of our trips, our travels, and all the people that we've met and the things we learned along the way. So I grabbed a couple of my fellow group members, Jack Courts and Shannen Barrett, to share with you some of our experiences today. They're going to give some insights on what we saw, what challenged them along the way, and some of the things that they learned through the experience, along with some of my thoughts as well. Welcome, Shannen and Jack, to the Ag Culture Podcast. It's great to have you here. We've been together for 6 weeks now, right? On the road in 5 different countries and had 60 different visits to farms, agribusinesses, and government agencies in those 5 countries, covering 20 different agricultural sectors in agriculture. So it's been a great time. I think we're all ready to go home. Well, I appreciate you guys spending your last night on the GFP, giving a few words of what your experience for this was and this trip that we did together was like for you. So we're going to go into just some background information on each one of you first. If you would share a few words with where you come from, what you do at home, and also why you decided to do Nuffield. Jack, if you want to start with that.
Thank you for having me, Paul. So I'm born and raised in far northwest New South Wales on a sheep, cattle and goat property. I've since relocated to Wellington. My wife and I live there. We lease 650 acres and operate about 200 cattle at any one point in time. And I'm employed as a farm manager on a merino farm as well.
And why did you decide to do Nuffield?
I think the appealing thing for me about Nuffield was being able to learn more and network within a variety of industries under the agricultural sector to further develop myself and learn more without going back to university or something like that.
Perfect. And Shannen?
Thanks for having me, Paul. So my name's Shannen. I am farming with my partner a couple of hours east of Perth in Western Australia. We are on a grain and sheep farm growing wheat, barley, oats and canola. And I also work off farm as the communications manager for a cereal breeding company in Australia. The reason why I applied for Nuffield, there was quite a few reasons. I have a few people in my life who are I really look up to, and they are past Nuffield scholars. So I just thought it was a really aspirational opportunity, I suppose. And I think it was a good opportunity to build my global perspective and kind of get out of my little bubble in Western Australia and in grains. And certainly this whole experience has certainly done that for me.
Great. I appreciate you giving a few words about yourselves. Now, if you wouldn't mind, I know I gave a few stats of what we did on our GFP or the things that we saw, but you could go in a little bit more detail. Where did we go? What did we do?
Yeah. So 6 weeks ago, we started in Brazil in a state called Mato Grosso do Sul, and we started at the Contemporary Scholars Conference. So that is a conference of about 80 international Nuffield scholars, plus a whole bunch of delegates from other countries and speakers. So there's about 120 people there. We did, I think it was about 4 days all up in a kind of conference style where we heard from a couple of big corporate farms in Brazil. We heard from a couple of people talking about deforestation in the Amazon. We heard from the governor of the state. So that was a great opportunity to get an overview of Brazil as a whole and Mato Grosso do Sul. And then we had a couple of days of farm tours, which was really awesome. And then we got in a bus, went across to Bonito to the west of the state. Another opportunity to have a look at farms, get to know everyone from all the other countries, all the other scholars. And then after about a week in Mato Grosso do Sul, we all split off into different tour groups. And we, the three of us, plus I think about 15 others, went down to the southern tip of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, and spent a week there looking around farms. So that was the first week of our Global Focus program. And that was an awesome opportunity to see a completely different aspect of Brazil from what we had seen. It was very European inspired and a lot higher rainfall, a lot greener. That was a great opportunity. And then 6 of us from that group flew up to Texas, where we met another 6 people, other past Nuffield scholars. And we spent a week looking around Texas, around the Central East. Yeah. Looking at a range of different industries, and that was great. And then flew across to Germany, spent a week in Germany, pretty much going from the south to the north, looking at a whole range of different farms and research institutions. And so that was excellent. And then we flew over to Ireland, up into Northern Ireland, where we met with government departments, a couple of farmers, made our way down into the Republic of Ireland, and that's where we are right now. So we spent a few days talking to farmers, spoke to the Department of Agriculture today and a couple of research institutions. So yeah, it's pretty much a wrap up of what we've done for the past 6 weeks. So it's been busy.
Yeah, definitely. And there was 7 countries represented out of the 12 people in our group. So that was interesting in and of itself. The conversations that we had at dinner at night and at lunch and on the road in between visits as well. That was just as engaging, I think, as some of the visits that we had. It was
absolutely, and I think the diversity in the industries as well. So in Brazil, we had, lots of livestock and grain farmers, and we had someone farming flies, and people in horticulture, and just a whole range of aspects. And then on our tour we've got dairy, we've got some livestock, we've got some grains, we've got a citrus grower, got some research people working with climate change and regen ag. So yeah, it's been really interesting to get the diverse perspectives on everything that's seen.
Definitely. Now, Jack, I want to turn it back over to you. Starting in Brazil, what was something that surprised you about agriculture in Brazil?
Well, I think the scale and how modern the Brazilian agriculture sector is, the broad scale farming over there, the reliable rainfall, double cropping cotton and soybeans certainly surprised me. And then the biggest myth about Brazil with the deforestation, that really surprised me as well, how false all of that is.
Shannon, did you have any paradigm shifts while we were in Brazil about Brazilian agriculture, or on a global perspective because of what you saw in Brazil?
Yeah, I think so. I think I went in with a preconceived idea that Brazil was maybe behind the rest of the world in agriculture, and that was very quickly debunked for me. They are very far ahead in terms of technology, sustainable practices. They're pretty much using completely no-till in their cropping rotations. They're using a lot of biologicals, which I had no idea. And I think, the double cropping and sometimes triple cropping is just mind-blowing. And I think that they are a huge powerhouse at the moment in terms of agriculture, global agriculture. And I think they've got a lot of potential to grow. They've got a lot of degraded pastures that they're really actively trying to turn into productive land. So I think that, we should all be very scared of Brazil.
Yeah, I think for me, that was probably the biggest eye opener is the degraded pasture land that the government has really made a big initiative to push into cropland in the next decade. Would equal the entire U.S. soybean and corn crop acres. And all of that land, they could probably double crop at some point in time. So that it's definitely going to change the dynamics of corn and soybean markets around the world and protein markets. moving on to, what do we have next? Texas, right? Texas. Jack, I know you enjoyed being in Texas. What were some of the things that you enjoyed most that you saw there?
We saw a wide range of things in Texas. We saw a lot of pecan farms. We were lucky enough to go to one large-scale dairy. I think the scale of that, the number of cows on feed in barns was, astronomically mind-blowing. The production out of that and the infrastructure within Texas as a whole was certainly surprising. So I think they're doing it very well there. They're extremely well represented in their government. Their agricultural sector is one of 6 ministers that you have to vote in. So they're elected as a government official on the power of the people. So I think through that system, they're well represented.
What are some of the challenges that you saw there, Shannon?
I suppose some of the challenges that really stood out to me was the urban sprawl. We heard from a lot of farmers that people, since COVID, were moving out of cities and buying farmland, little blocks of farmland that is just kind of jacking up the prices for farmers to expand. So they're losing a lot of productive farmland to residential land, which, it's pretty scary for the agricultural production in Texas.
To touch on that a little bit more, the way the land titles are held within Texas, they can subdivide, I think, down to 10 acres. So that land ownership and tenure allows them to do that. And while there's plenty of positives in subdividing a high value block of land off, there's also a lot of negatives because it drives inflated land value, and water security then becomes a problem as the small acreages can access water the same way a large ranch can. And the water rights and the head rights are not well regulated in Texas.
I think one thing that stood out to me was there seemed to be almost a cultural divide between ranchers and farmers in Texas, and that was something that we saw as we went around. We saw some ranches, we saw some farms, and you could definitely tell there was maybe a little bit of rivalry, and also just a difference in technology adoption and management styles. So that was something that stood out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something else that stood out to me was that climate change and kind of transitioning to regenerative practices and thinking about the environment didn't seem to be as front of mind as other countries, particularly Australia, Brazil, and then going on to Germany and Ireland. I think, Texas, it just didn't seem to be a key part of their policy making and the discussions that we had on farms. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yep. All right. So now moving on to our European excursion of the trip, starting in Germany. What were some of your highlights, Shannon?
Germany was really interesting. I really enjoyed Germany. The people that we saw and hosted us were really welcoming and open and transparent with their businesses, and we just felt very welcomed to Germany, which was great. I think I wasn't necessarily surprised about Germany. I think that I had probably a conception of preconceived idea about Germany being very innovative, using really high technology, small scale, but can do it really well. And I think that is exactly what we saw. And I think we saw some really diverse farms in terms of they're growing pork, they're growing pig, they've got arable, and then they've got the aerobic digesters and the solar farms. And I think that's probably something that really stood out to me is the diversity of their businesses over there and how in front, I suppose, they are in terms of sustainability. Using the aerobic digesters particularly, I'd never seen that before. So that was, really interesting.
How about you, Jack? What were some of the challenges or paradigm shifts that you had being there?
Having never been to any European country, I think the mind-blowing thing is the subsidies throughout all industries, whether it be for the methane bioplants and a 20-year subsidy that for that at an agreed value for a kilowatt hour of power, to be able to do the sums on that and make a pure investment to then complement your business, whether it be a maize growing business to feed the digester or a piggery or a dairy to feed slurry, to be able to do this and create a renewable energy is something really new to me.
What were your favorite visits in Germany?
Well, we had a lot of diversity there.
Yeah.
We saw a 40 hectare greenhouse farm growing peppers, strawberries and tomatoes. To have something of this scale was just mind-blowing. And we went to the Van Aston Group piggery, which I think they have 22,000 sows, having 30.2 or 4 piglets per year each. The scale of that, and having never been through a piggery like we did there, to see the hygiene and the production and the genetics was just mind-blowing.
I think it was really interesting to see such big scale operations, Van Aston and Wittenberg. And then we saw the opposite end of that, where we saw small farms. We went to another Nuffield Scholars farm that she works on outside of Berlin, and that's where we saw a smaller scale, still quite a large farm, but doing kind of farm to plate, which I really love to see. So you kind of see both aspects. So they're growing asparagus and blueberries, and then we ate asparagus and blueberries for dinner at the restaurant, and we bought lots of things from the shop. And I just thought that was a really interesting business model, growing it and selling it on the farm. And they have a lot of people come through their doors buying their asparagus, and it's just, that was very cool.
What were your thoughts of the competitiveness going into the future of Europe from what we saw in Germany?
I think one of the things that stood out to me was the regulation kind of inhibiting, I think, into the future, Germany and Europe. I think climate change will really impact Germany, and there will be technology available in terms of gene editing to increase production, particularly in arable crops. And I think if the EU regulation doesn't allow gene editing, technology like gene editing to be used, I think that will really hinder Europe's ability to produce a lot of grain. So that's something that really stood out to me. So hopefully that is not the case for the EU, but
I think as an Australian with large-scale production of our commodities, we can compete on price. However, Germany has a few other advantages, one being location, two being their domestic infrastructure with their roadways and the way they can freight commodities around the country. And as a farmer, yes, you're regulated, but you're also subsidised to compensate for the regulations, whether this be something like a chemical ban, you're subsidised to then use a substitute like tilling.
Yeah.
So there's pros and cons of everything within the domestic production of what Germany does.
Yeah. One thing, going back to what you were saying about the regulations, that I heard from a couple of different producers that are livestock producers is the banks have really been cautious about making loans and investments on livestock operations because the regulations have been changing so fast. So in order to upgrade your infrastructure to this new regulation, banks don't want to give you the money because it might be completely different 3 or 4 years from now before that loan's even paid back. And I think that's something that could really inhibit the livestock sectors in not just Germany but the whole EU, that they're really struggling with.
There seems to be a lot of uncertainty around subsidies and regulations, and I think it was mentioned a few times that regulations were brought in overnight, with no warning at all. So an interesting concept, something that we're not used to in Australia. We have hardly any subsidies, so that was really opened my mind to the pros and the cons of the subsidy and regulation system.
Yeah. One conversation that I wanted to bring up that we had while we were in Germany, we had the privilege of meeting Mr. and Mrs. Horsch from Horsch Manufacturing. And I know all of us were very fascinated by Mr. Horsch's travels around the world and his insights, kind of doing what we're doing here on our GFP. He's done over his career. What were some of the big takeaways that you guys had from that talk?
I think the one big takeaway from the conversations was with Mr. Horsch was the way he's developed his company on market research and actually providing products that his consumers want, not what he thinks they want, to a standard. I think the standard of manufacturing that he's had is integral to the reputation of his business, and that's a standard that is known worldwide. You know, he's a massive global conglomerate.
Okay, so moving on to our last two stops really. We started out in our trip on the island of Ireland, in Northern Ireland, which is actually part of the UK, not the Republic of Ireland. So what were some of the things that stood out to you in Northern Ireland?
I think the politics of Northern Ireland and the history of that's a big thing, particularly within the own governments being part of the UK and the EU. And then you look back further into religion, Catholics and the Protestants, and the history of all of this. Then the IRA Republic from Ireland, the IRA Army from Ireland, and the influence of all of this, the history of the country's one side, but then the agricultural industry making up 20-something percent of the 22% of the GDP.
Yeah.
And the regulation that the farmers have there from the UK and the EU is just mind-blowing. The phosphates and the nitrates, leaching and runoff, the regulation behind this, the pollution of main water sources in the locks was something different than what we'd seen in the whole trip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jack said. And the one thing that stood out to me, we went to Parliament House in Belfast for dinner, hosted by an MP there, which was a really awesome opportunity to have a look at their political history. And it just blew me that they the voting system between the nationalists and the unionists, and the fact that they didn't have parliament. They go periods, years without having a parliament sitting. That just blew my mind. So the complexity of being a part of the UK, and then also having a common border with the EU is really interesting, and the influence of that on agriculture and their exports and things. So
yeah. To me, being from the U.S., where we have a large population, a large landmass, to go to a country that has less than 2 million people in, I don't even know the exact area, but it's not a very big area, and that blew me away. Starting out in Texas and Brazil with really large land masses, and getting to a country that the average size farm, I think, was it 24 hectares in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that. So roughly 60 acres, and 40 or 50 cows for a dairy farm. That was really something that stuck out to me is how are they going to compete in the future and be competitive in a global market. It's really interesting to see that they don't really have the ability to consolidate either, because of how the land has been structured historically with land purchases, as well as just the infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
And then moving into Southern Ireland, a lot of similar challenges, but then also a lot of different challenges. Obviously, a more political, more stable political environment, but then the complexities of being a part of the EU and having the same regulations as the EU. That was really fascinating. And just the divide between two countries that are, share the same island, was really interesting. What
were some of the challenges that you saw in the Republic of Ireland, Jack?
I think the biggest challenges are in the environmental side and the regulations coming in from the EU probably not being in line with what consumers are wanting. There's a massive push for organics in the EU. Ireland itself has put their hand up to be 10% organic by 2030, and whether consumers are prepared to pay the premium price for organics then is another question. And I think without subsidies, would producers be going this way or not? Does it drive innovation from the producer's side or not? They're the big questions that have gone unanswered.
A couple of things that stood out to me as challenges in the Republic of Ireland, is the environmental regulations that are coming in, particularly around reducing livestock numbers. And Ireland is just the perfect climate for grasses, and so their entire industry is built on livestock, dairy, beef, and sheep. So reducing those livestock numbers.
How important do you think understanding the cultural landscape and history of a country is in order to really understand its agriculture?
Yeah, yeah, very. I think we've been to quite a few. Every country we've been to have had a lot of historical influence in its agriculture, particularly Germany. We were in, the old West Germany and East Germany, and to see the difference between the size of the farms, the complexities that come with that. Even I think when was the Berlin Wall come down? 89, 90?
Yeah, right around 90. Yeah.
It's been 30 something years, and there's still not necessarily a divide, but you can definitely see the difference. And I think it's really important in understanding a country's agricultural landscape to understand the historical situation that's happened to, bring it to where it is today. And I think we also saw that in Brazil. We went, down into the south, and you could see a lot of German and Italian influence.
Yeah.
And that brought a lot of different industries in terms of wine and horticulture and those sorts of things. So, and then as you moved up and you saw these bigger scale farms, you saw a lot of German influence, and that's kind of where you saw a lot of innovation and technology. And so it's really interesting to understand how the history has affected the industry.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I was really fascinated by the East Germany, West Germany difference. I mean, that was drastic difference, like you said, almost 40 years later. But also, even, I know a lot of people don't want to talk about it when you're in Germany, but thinking back to World War II, when the Nazis built up their military strength before the war even started, they built a lot of infrastructure that we still saw when we were there that made it a powerhouse economically, even after the war. A lot of it had been destroyed during the war, but the groundwork had been laid for great road systems. Even the soil grading system.
Soil grading system is amazing.
Yeah, that was a very big innovation, especially for almost 100 years ago now. That's something that probably a lot of people don't want to mention because it's a sensitive topic, but there was a lot of innovation during that time frame that came through that is still utilized today, that they are leveraging to take advantage of.
I think a big thing on the history for me was European settlement in Australia is quite new. When you come to a country like Germany and you go down to Bavaria, and we're seeing buildings they're built, before 1000 AD. They're over 1100 years old, and the influence of all of this, and you move into modern times and you come into, World War II, as we just spoke about, and the infrastructure and the development there that has put into place what we're utilising now.
Yeah. So wrapping up our travels, what is your big takeaway, or do you have a big takeaway of a global perspective that kind of formed over the last 6 weeks in your mind about agriculture?
I think my big takeaway was sustainability. Everywhere we went, we spoke a lot about sustainability and sustainability framework, and it gave me probably the the necessity to go home and actually learn about what's going on in Australia, because I think I've had my head in the sand a little bit. And I know we're doing great work in terms of sustainability, and a lot of industries have got their sustainability framework set up. And I think, that's kind of given me the drive to go home, get involved a little bit more in that sort of space on my own farm and learn about it in the business that I work for and in my industry. So that's really my key takeaway.
And the key takeaway for me is that the saying that those who show up make the rules. So getting involved and showing your face in whatever it might be within your industry or your community, and trying to influence your own decision, because if you don't fill a seat, the next person will, and whether that voice is as good or heading in the same direction or right direction with governance or whatever it might be is the big question behind that. And another one is just having an open mind to entertain all ideas.
How about you, Paul?
I'm the one asking the question. I've got a lot of them. What I found really interesting, seeing across so many different countries and that have different priorities, is in the future. You look at, especially in Europe, they're so focused on sustainability, so focused on climate change. It seems to me that they're a little bit in balance with food security, and I think that's something that has caught a lot of countries out in the past. And then you look at like Brazil, and even in the U.S., we export a lot, right? So we're focused on developing new markets and increasing production, and trying to do more with less resources as a sustainability initiative, but really looking at how do we continue to grow our industries, not necessarily just keep them plateaued. And I think that's going to be a dynamic that really shapes the global trade of agricultural goods going into the future. And that just gave me a really good perspective of the dynamics going on in the world today, and how that could shape agricultural policy globally going into the future. So before we wrap up, we've had a lot of fun one-liners on this trip.
Oh, God.
So I want to hear, what was your favorite one-liner on the trip?
Very nice.
One more time.
Yes, we've got Polish Jakob on the trip, and he's got some great one-liners that have repeated themselves for the past 6 weeks. So, yeah, I think every one-liner in our mind is from him. Yeah, it's been a really good 6 weeks to get to know everyone in Brazil. There was obviously a lot more people there.
Yeah.
And talking to people that I never would have spoken to if it were not for Nuffield. And then past three weeks on this trip with our group has been really awesome. We've had some fun times, some challenging times, some very thought-provoking debates around the dinner table.
Some interesting experiences.
Yes.
Being jammed into a car with 5 people and 6 weeks worth of luggage, so there's not a lot of room to spare.
Yeah, showering, going into a piggery and having to shower and get dressed into prison clothes. It was quite interesting.
In a group.
In a group setting, yeah.
Sharing beds. We've had everything.
Yeah. Really gotten to be close in
Absolutely,
the last few weeks.
Yeah.
But it's been great. I've enjoyed all of our talks, our late night discussions, sometimes intense debates with fellow group members, and that's how you learn, right? That's how you get perspective in life.
That's right. That's where the thought-provoking comes from.
Yeah. Well, Jack, Shannon, thank you so much for joining me today at the Ag Culture Podcast. If people want to find out more about you, how do they get in touch with you?
Good question. Yes, I'm on Instagram. My handle is Shannon with an E, B_. And I'm also on Twitter. I think it's just Shannen Barrett on Twitter. So, I try to be quite active on there. And I think if you just Google my name and Nuffield, then all of my contact details come up. So.
Great.
And I'll put my handles in the bio. That's what they say on the podcast, isn't it? So,
yeah, we'll make sure they're in the show notes.
Jack _ Courts on Instagram. And,
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Paul.
Well, thank you for listening to that episode with Jack Courts and Shannen Barrett. Our group had an amazing experience over the last 6 weeks, and I'm glad we were able to share it with you. Now, as always, we'll have our guests' information in the show notes so you can reach out to them and connect. If you are interested, along the journey, the last 6 weeks, we did a lot of social media posts, both on the Ag Culture Podcast social media across many different platforms, as well as my personal Facebook and LinkedIn pages. So if you'd like to check out some of the pictures, the videos that we took along the way, and see the places that we were able to visit, check those posts out. I hope you get some value out of that. And until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the Ag Culture Podcast.